So for those of you who are new here, my name is Charles Small. I'm the director of the Yale Initiative for the Interdisciplinary Study of Antisemitism, or YIISA. And today, so thank you for coming. Today, we're really happy to have Professor Menashri here. The title of his talk will be Iran, the Middle East, and the USA following the presidential elections, a view from Jerusalem. Professor Menashri is the director for the Center of Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. He's also the dean of overseas students at Tel Aviv University. He's the dean of the University Special Programs Division. He's the incumbent of the Parviz and Quran Nazarene Chair for Modern Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. And he's also the professor at the Department of Middle East History and African Studies. And he's the chairman of the Maccabean Foundation, which does amazing work actually in Israel, helping to fund scholarships for Mizrahi or Sephardic Jewish students with deprived backgrounds in Israel. They do amazing work. Dr. Menashri has been here several times. He's a friend of YIISA. He's on this trip and other trips. He's traveled all over the world speaking about Iran. He was a Fulbright scholar at Princeton and at Cornell. He's taught at the University of Chicago, the University of Melbourne, the University of Munich, and Waseda in Tokyo. He's the chairperson of the International Sephardic Educational Fund and the president of the Citizens Empowerment Center in Israel, trying to bring about reform to the Israeli electoral system. He was given Ford Foundation funding, Fulbright Foundation funding, and also Ben Gurion Foundation funding on many projects. He's widely published academic books and articles in journals and newspapers. So he's really, I think, the leading expert on Iranian issues in the world, and certainly from Israel. And I think the title of the talk today, from our perspective, I would argue that the view from Jerusalem and the views from the Middle East and from the region are really important to understand. And I think we seem to have placed ourselves in a bubble, perhaps at Yale and perhaps even in Washington, regarding the threats and the issues that are really at stake, not only for Israel and demonization and what I call the genocidal anti-Semitism of the regime vis-a-vis Israel, but also in terms of human rights, the subjugation of women, of gay people, of the Baha'is and other religious minorities in Iran, the sort of differentiating of citizenship, the threat of destabilizing the Middle East, the threat to Sunnis countries. The list goes on. I know David will give us a perspective from Jerusalem and the view of Jerusalem into this whole situation at a very important moment. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you for coming. I'm glad to be here again, and this time my talk will not be on the Jews of Iran, but the main topic of YIISA, anti-Semitism, but rather about more general developments in Iran. After the elections, presidential election, when I coined this title, I meant after the Iranian presidential elections, because now after the year of American election, but we can do both of them. It's basically, I refer to both of them. And I'm also glad that they allow me to speak about this topic, because here is my hesitations when coining the title. I wrote initially the view from Tel Aviv. Not only because I am from Tel Aviv University, but also because my views do not conform fully or to a great deal with that of Jerusalem. So then I thought that if I say Tel Aviv, as though as an Israeli citizen, I do not recognize that Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. And that's something I don't want to do. So I compromised, I think, with suggesting a view from Israel. But again, this is the credit for the YIISA to allow people who do not really think along the line, specific line, to express their views. And I think it's very important for any of our academic in interaction to have views from different aspects and from different angles and different perspectives on this rather significant issue that often enough has also some political connotation. And I'm not a politician, I've never been, probably I've never been. No, I've never been, not probably. I've never been a politician, so I speak from my studies about the Middle East and Iran. And here is a difficulty that any scholar of discussing Iran will have while speaking in such a distinguished group of people at Yale on the topic. Many years back, when I was asked to speak about Iran, I didn't know where to start because really people didn't know almost anything about Iran. Today, when I'm coming to speak about Iran, I have another difficulty. Where should I start when everyone is an expert on Iran? You open your newspapers every day and you read about Iran. So I want to take permission to take one step back from the current immediate developments and try and put the Iranian Islamic Revolution and the developments there in what I would believe is a more proper framework, the general framework of the developments in Iran and the Middle East. The Iranians have marked a few months ago 30 years of the Islamic Revolution. And I think they have done it with a deep soul-searching process, with the main question in the air being, is what we got 30 years after, is what our parents or ourselves were aiming at in 1979 when we joined Ayatollah Khomeini to topple the Shah and establish the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think that if you ask yourself also what is behind the students or young people riots in Iran following the presidential Iranian elections, this is the same question. What did we achieve from this revolution? To what degree the results of the revolution so far conform with the aims of the people who sacrificed so much in participating in a magnificent movement to overthrow a powerful Shah and establish the first Islamic Republic in the modern Middle East. But I think if you ask this question of young people in Iran, and not young people in Iran, it's very likely that the answer will be no, our expectations were much higher than what we expect, the way we see today. The Iranian people, more than any other people in the Middle East, they have fought in the last 100 years to achieve two main goals that I can very briefly term them the struggle for bread and freedom, welfare and liberties. 30 years after the Islamic Revolution, this has not been yet achieved. The degree of disillusionment, disenchantment that you see in the Iranian streets go back to this frustration from the results of the revolution that do not conform with what the revolution used to be in the beginning. So if you look at the goals of the revolution, the Iranian Islamic Revolution, like any other revolution in history or any other political change in history, they have two main aims in mind. First, when you take over, your main aim as a political system is to maintain in power. And I think in this sense, the Islamic Revolution has been so far fairly successful. 30 years after, we have the same Islamic regime in place. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, but so far it is fairly stable and in control over instruments of power. But revolutions do not enter into our life simply to replace one government with another. Often enough, they come to prove that they have different ideology and that different ideology is the best cure to the problems of society. The Islamic Revolution certainly was an ideological movement with the slogan, Islam is the solution, trying to prove that joining the caravan of Islam will bring you to salvation, to the promised land. So if 30 years after the revolution, I think politically speaking, the regime is still in place, but the aims of the revolution have not been yet met in any significant way. And before going on, I want very briefly to put on your table the three questions that I usually start with them when I discuss about Iranian revolution. First question is to what degree this revolution is Islamic in its roots. And here I must admit that if you use Western terminology that distinguishes between religion and state, religion and science, religion and so many different things, the Islamic Revolution was not really religious. It was social, economic, political, cultural, anti-imperialist. In the world of Islam, like in Judaism, these are all part and parcel of your religious belief system. In the Middle East, Jews or Muslims, there is no distinction between religion and state. Everything is religious or has to do with religion. Even what we eat is being defined by religion. Social structure, political system. So if you use Western terminology, the revolution was much wider than pure religious revolution in the narrow Western meanings of the term. It was, however, religious in Middle Eastern terminology. What I'm trying to say here is that the people who joined Ayatollah Khomeini did not join merely to replace one government with another. They didn't join Ayatollah Khomeini with the hope of bringing Islamic regime. They brought Ayatollah Khomeini because life was miserable and people were looking to hope to improve the life of themselves and at least their children. I put it differently, and I often say, not that I'm proud to say this, but as the way I recognize myself. I lived in the last 2 years of the Shah's rule in Tehran, doing study with the support of the Ford Foundation in Tehran University. Had I been Iranian citizen, I might have joined Ayatollah Khomeini. And not because of religion and not because of Islam, because life was so bad. And Khomeini provided the hope that the future will be brighter. If this analysis is true, this final stabilization of the Islamic regime does not have to do with a degree of return to Islam, but rather to a degree that the problems that motivated people to join Ayatollah Khomeini in '79 have been elevated or at least significantly eased. 30 years after, this did not happen. And what did happen is that revolution, which was initially social, political, cultural movement, turned to be an Islamic revolution. It's an Islamic revolution in its results rather than in the aims, if you use Western terminology. I hope I made this point clear. And I want to move to another question, to what degree the philosophy of this regime conforms with Islamic philosophy. Well, here is the question, what is Islamic philosophy? Is there one thing that you can say, this is the Islamic philosophy? This is the philosophy, this Islamic ideology? Well, of course there is one. There is one Judaism, one Christianity, and one Islam. But we don't live today exactly according to what Judaism used to be 3,000 years ago, or Christians today do not live according to what Christianity used to be 2,000 years ago. And Islam today is not exactly what the Prophet Muhammad brought to this world in the 7th century. We live today by our interpretations of the principles of faith. And in each generation, different locations, there are different interpretations that can be regarded as valid and appropriate. When Khomeini came to power in 1979, there have been 7 grand Islamic authorities, grand ayatollahs in Iran. None of them supported Ayatollah Khomeini. The highest ranking ayatollah in Iran at that time, most learned and much more respected, academically speaking, religiously speaking, in terms of his religious standing, was Ayatollah Shariat Madari, who was forced under house arrest until he passed away 7 years later. The most leading Ayatollah, well, maybe not the most leading Ayatollah, but the man that Ayatollah Khomeini picked up to be his successor after his death, Ayatollah Montazeri, a leading Iranian Ayatollah, does not have the right today to speak to his students. There are people here from the Human Rights Documentation Center, and they can tell you more information about so many people who don't have the freedom to speak, even if they are prominent scholars. Not to speak about professors at universities. What we saw in Iran, therefore, is a revolution in understanding Islam, even more than it's an Islamic revolution in terms of ideology. And here I usually like to quote an Iranian thinker who was one of the leading figures in the cultural revolution in Iran. He was the head of the cultural revolution movement in Iran after the Islamic Revolution's success. Abdul Karim Soroush, who said a sentence that I think contains all what I want to say in few words. He said, there is no one interpretation of Islam. There is no one interpretation that is better than the other, and there is no final interpretation of Islam. And in a very courageous way, he added, and there can be no official interpretation of Islam. Namely, even an Islamic regime cannot come and tell you, this is the sole way to understand the principles of faith. Because I happen to think so. That's not Islam. There is a degree of pluralism in religious thinking. Khomeini's philosophy represented one extremist trend in the world of Islam, that he brought them to the center in case of Iran to power, influencing movements like Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, FIS, and other movements in history, in the Middle East. And the third question that brings us closer to our topic of current developments is to what degree the policy of the Islamic regime conforms with the ideology of Ayatollah Khomeini of 30 years ago. And here again, like any other Islamic revolution in history, look at the French Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Russian Revolution, whatever. Look at any government who takes over. There is a huge difference between what leaders say before taking power and what they do after taking power. Well, it's not criticism of anybody. It's natural, and that's the way it should be. When you are in opposition, you express your worldview. You say what you want to do. There is no tax on promises of election campaign. Then somehow it happens that you are elected, and then you can only do what you can do. Certainly, it's not what you promised. We had a Prime Minister in Israel, Arik Sharon, who immediately after being elected, he initiated unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, totally unlike his pledges during the election campaign. And he was challenged on this point. He said, following Sunday, he said, what you see from here, from the chair of the Prime Minister, you don't see from there, from the benches of the opposition. Well, so if you are a candidate, you say what you want to say, then you can be Prime Minister totally different. That's the same thing happened to the Iranian Revolution. I know you're thinking about other administrations. It happens elsewhere too. But it is not typical to the Iranian Revolution, but it's also Islamic Revolution. I'll make it in very concise, saying that wherever there was a clash between ideology and the interest of the running system or existing system, the interest of the ruling system, or of Iran, of the interest of Iran as being viewed by the ruling system, won over ideology. We don't have much time to go into details. I've done it previous time I've been here, and I don't want to go into examples, but take my word, I'll give you maybe one sentence. One fatwa, one religious decree that was published by Ayatollah Khomeini, the founding father of the Islamic Revolution, when he was asked about this gap between ideology and interest. He issued a religious decree stating that for the sake of the public interest, for the sake of maslahah, public interest of the people, an Islamic regime is entitled to destroy a mosque and suspend the 5 basic principles of Islam. What else do you need to legitimize preference of interest over ideology? Now, on what issues to compromise, in what ways to adopt pragmatic policies. On these, there are differences of opinion between different factions in Iran. And there are many factions, many trends within Iranian political system, but let me just refer to 2 main camps or trends or waves. The one that we usually call reformist, pragmatic, liberal if you want, moderate if you wish, on the one hand, and the more radical, extremist, conservative trend on the other side. Of course, each of them has different sub-groupings in the camps. Let me say a word about the more pragmatic element. Well, I think that the Islamic Revolution has produced, after 30 years, a magnificent young generation of people, students, girls, boys, whom you could see in the streets of Tehran recently, that are struggling for freedom more than we see them in other parts of the Middle East. Iran is the most active student organizations in the Middle East, the best, in my view, cinema industry, the most active human organizations. They have the newspapers in Iran are interesting to read until they are being shut down by the government. Intellectuals write books that are amazing for me to see them being published in Iran, not really under Ahmadinejad, but before Ahmadinejad. Just imagine that Iran has now almost 60% of the student body is composed of women. 60 years ago, there was not a single girl studying in any Iranian university. So I think that whoever looks for the future, a nation that has a wonderful young boys and girls and students and women that the Iranians have, they have a bright future. The problem is not with the people. The problem is with the running, with the government in power. So it go out of this, and I spoke about newspapers. You know, I spoke a few years ago in Tel Aviv about the relative freedom of expression in Iran, and one of our officials told me how you can speak about even relative freedom of expression when 100 newspapers were shut down in the last 5 years, between 2000 and 2005. 100 liberal newspapers were shut down. And my answer was show me in other countries in the Middle East, which is 100 liberal newspapers, to shut them down. We shut down 100 liberal newspapers. Still, I look at the half full of the glass right now. That is half full of the glass. And you speak about intellectuals being in jail. Yeah, but you know, they give you a title of a book published in Iran by Akbar Ganji. He is now in the United States. He was jailed after the publication of the book, and you hear the title of the book, you will have jailed him yourself. The book, the title is A Fascist Interpretation of Islam, and the book in blue claims that the Iranian government is fascist. Well, of course, you can't publish such a book in Tehran and be free the day after. And when I spoke about it, an Iranian friend of mine, is professor of one of the universities, of this rather dichotomy between free expression and suppression. He told me, you know, they tell you there is no freedom of expression in Iran. That's not true. We have freedom of expression. What we don't have is freedom after expression. Think about it, it's deeper than it sounds. They go, they struggle, and I admire this civil society of Iran. But my problem is they don't have any say in formulating Iranian policy on any meaningful thing, on the top of the national security issues. So our problem is not with, my problem is not with civil society. My problem is that this civil society and the reform movements, they don't have much influence in how to run the state. Full power is still in the hand of the more radical, extremist, conservative groups, led by Khamenei, Ahmadinejad, Mesbah Yazdi, and I don't want to confuse you with other names, which they have 4 elements in power. First, the speaking name of God. In the Middle East, it's so great that you wake up in the morning and you know exactly what is the will of God. And you share it with the people and say, well, that's the way you should behave because that's what God wants. I don't know if Skype or whatever, contact with heaven every day and they know exactly. Well, it's not only in Islam, it's also we have among our Jewish leaders some people who think that they know exactly what God wants. It's very difficult in the Middle East to fight with the will of God as being expressed by the people who are supposed to know what is the will of God. And thanks God, we have so many people who know what God really wants. Now, if God's not enough, God forbid, because it should be enough. Just in war, just in case he's not on guard, they have the revolutionary guards. Now, if you're a revolution, you have the will of God on one side, the army and the revolutionary guard on the other side, you are safe. What else you need? Well, there's one other thing that it's good to have, is the will to fight for keeping your power in hand. And the clerics in Iran did not take power 30 years ago to concede it voluntarily. They learned the lesson of their own revolution, and there was a students' uprising and rioting in the streets of Tehran. One thing they say was for me very impressive. Say, we are not going to let them to do to us what we did to the Shah 30 years ago. They certainly learned the lesson of their own revolution. And I quote you just one sentence from the man who is believed to be the mentor to Ahmadinejad, that he said in a Friday sermon, whoever thinks that Islam is religion of mercy does not understand what is Islam. Islam is a religion that dictates to us to take sharp sword and cut the heads and tongues of people who act or speak against us. And this is the mentor of Ahmadinejad. God forbid, Islam is a religion of mercy. But there are such people like Misbah Yazdi who would even claim that Islam is not religion of mercy. They start their every step and say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of merciful God. But then can you say that Islam is not religion of mercy? But it was said by a leading Ayatollah, mentor of Ahmadinejad, one of the most powerful men in Iraq today. The other advantage that they have is that there is no opposition. Well, of course, there are oppositions, and they hate each other more than they hate the regime in Tehran. In the early days of the revolution, I spent much of my time speaking with the leaders of different factions of the Iranian revolution, mainly in Paris, which they are situated. And it was amazing, you know, speaking with Bakhtiar, rather than telling you what is wrong with the regime in Tehran, he was speaking against Bani Sadr. Bani Sadr was speaking against Amini against someone else, to the point that I thought that these people have been all corrupted by French culture. I mean, in the positive meaning of the word, they think that they are just like Napoleon Bonaparte or Charles de Gaulle that single-handedly will save the nation. I can promise you one thing, the next leader of Iran will not come to Iran with Air France like Khomeini did. They will come from inside the country. And so this movement, and I see them in Los Angeles now, in Great Neck, and Kings Point, and all over London and Paris, they're still criticizing, but this is not the hope for changing Iran, and I think if I come to it later, the hope is from inside Iran. Now, what was led these young people in Iran to the streets after the elections? And I don't want to go into this election. It's very difficult even for me to call this June 12th elections. But I think that they represent a significant disillusionment of the children of the revolution from the result of this movement 30 years ago. As I said earlier, these two aims of the movement, welfare and freedom, have not been achieved. There is no greater welfare for the poor people of Iran today that used to be under the Shah. And there is no greater freedom for the people of Iran today, or not significantly much freedom today that used to be before. Under the Shah, and I lived in Iran the last 2 years of the Shah's rule, and I must tell you, I learned to appreciate democracy living in a non-democratic system for the first time in my life. Only people who practice or live under a non-democratic system can understand what is the value of democracy. And I hope that the young people sitting here would not take democracy as for granted, because it's the most important thing that we have in our life. But under the Shah, to speak against the Shah was a crime. Today, to speak against the ruling system is a sin, and I don't know which one of them is better. Certainly, today is not much better than it used to be before the revolution. It was, in a way, also, this movement, a reaction to the change in the elections of last November in America. President Obama brought with him a promise to the underprivileged and people in the non-democratic system that they have a friend in Washington. Now let me put it bluntly. Wherever there is a Democrat president in the White House, you can rest assured there's going to be a revolution in Iran. And I'm not against it, God forbid. On the front, I was quoted I was in November 4, 2008, and quoted one from the newspaper to say that this election in America was one of the most happiest days in my life. And I really enjoyed this to see the young people in the streets, joyful, and these winds of change coming. Because I'm not, and you see my views about dialogue, I'm not against the concept of dialogue. But I'll tell you what's my concept of dialogue, which is different from what's in Washington today. But history of relations between Iran and the United States is very brief. America is in the Middle East only since the Second World War II, basically. I don't speak about missionary groups who have been in the 19th century. Politically, America is in the Middle East after the withdrawal of Britain after World War II. Now, in 1951, those of you who remember, Mossadegh in Iran, the prime minister, who led to the exile of the Shah with raising this philosophy of nationalization of oil. He led this movement to success. In 1951, you remember who was the president of the White House? It's Harry Truman. 61, 62, Khomeini became a national hero in Iran, opposing the Shah's policies and his white revolution. The president is JFK. 78, 79, Islamic Revolution. Then you have Carter in the White House. And now you have Obama, which he came with a promise, and people viewed, not because Democrat president wants to lead to revolution in other places, because they put human rights so high on their agenda. And if you live in Iran, you say, wow, now we have a president that we can go and struggle against our government to achieve freedoms with the backing of the President of the United States. This Democrat system has given, and this is to convince that I think positively when I say that they have given support to these winds of change in movements in the Middle East, certainly in Iran, and especially in President Obama. The way he came out of where he came from to achieve power was very impressive. His slogan, "Yes, we can," came from what? Encourage many people. Now, this slogan is not Obama's slogan. Yeah, I remember 2005, the slogan of Ahmadinejad in his first election campaign was "Yes, we can." And then I was told that it's a Chavez election in 2004. So that's not new, but it's captivated the minds of the people of America, and that's what counts. Doesn't matter where you broke it from. It doesn't have to give footnotes. Yes, we can, as was mentioned initially by Chavez. We do it in our university life. We don't have to do it in politics. And the way of, you know the meaning of the word Obama in Persian? The way it's written, it means he with us. And the students were going to Obama, he is with us. And then later on they say Obama ist, he is not with us. And last November 4, when students were in the streets, one of the very attractive slogans was Obama, 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 and how Obama, Obama, Obama. You are with them, with the government of Iran, or with us. And it sounds beautiful in Persian. Obama, 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 and how Obama. So Obama is also named and also he with us. Are you with us or are you with them? After coming to power, basically, these winds of change were translated into will to move things forward. Unfortunately, when they started their struggle, the President of the United States, well, maybe closed his eyes, certainly closed his mouth, and he didn't speak about this movement. And were very disappointed from the perspective of Iranian students. Not that President Obama was faced with an easy choice, because here is the White House President of America. In 1953, Americans interfered with Iran and turned to be very bad. In 1978, America did not interfere in America and was also turned to be not good. So what does Shakespeare say? To be or not to be? That's the question that was faced with the American president, but the fact remains that students in Iran were very disappointed that the administration did not say something general in favor of human rights at that very sensitive days. What this movement wants? I think that the movement wants to change realities of life, to go back to the hopes of '79, and to make sure that Iran is more democratic and provides opportunity for the underprivileged. I think the realities today makes Iran of end of 2009 significantly different from before the revolution of June. This regime has lost to a great degree its legitimacy. A regime that was based itself on morality, religiosity, and values is now based primarily on the arms of force. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, did not behave like Khomeini, his predecessor, that always took care to be above the factions and remain the supreme leader of the entire nation. Khamenei took side with one faction against the other. And then the students go to the streets and chant death to dictatorship. I don't think they only mean the government of Ahmadinejad, but they have the supreme leader in mind. I remember when the Islamic Revolution in 1978, 8th of 78, the Shah wanted to appease the opposition, and he replaced the government and appointed one of the oppositionary leaders, Bakhtiar, to prime minister. The demonstrators went to the streets and say, we asked to change the horse. They changed the saddle. Ahmadinejad is not the main issue. Ahmadinejad is only an instrument. And I think when they want to change the system, they want to change the system at large. The limitation of their power is that, well, for one thing, I don't believe that Mousavi seems to be the charismatic leader who will bring the change in Iran. He doesn't have the charisma, but he doesn't have the alternative or doesn't carry the alternative cohesive ideology to confront this current system. To lead the revolution to success, you need to bring people to unify behind a slogan or a concept that all agree. It was easy for Khomeini because his slogans were very easy to sell and they're very absolute. He said, the Shah must go. You understand this language. Islam is the solution, it's clear. And what does Mousavi say? We want to change 30% of the political structure, 40% of the economic system. You cannot lead people to mass movement with an aim which is to a degree. 30–40% doesn't work. No, I have not been revolutionary in my life, and I'm not here to teach you how to go to revolution. But people who want to go to revolution must know that you cannot go to slogan which is only gradual. Mousavi is part of the system. He doesn't want to change the system, he wants to modify the system. And you cannot bring millions of people behind you to a change of a degree. You cannot even bring a revolution to success only with calls death to dictatorship, only for call for political change. You need to bring the economic factor into it and promise people something in their daily life, a betterment of their daily life. What is, do you have still time, Charles? Yeah. I'll try to be very brief. What is in my view, the problem that I see with Iran, the challenge of Iran? The problem is not with the people, as I said, it's not even with the government. The problem that I see is that a combination of a radical regime like the Iranian regime is and a weapon of mass destruction. We can tolerate countries going nuclear, we can tolerate radical movements, but the combination of the two, a radical movement that holds, on the other hand, weapons of mass destruction, is something that the world, I believe, cannot tolerate. And people say that as far as Israel, and this is the view from Jerusalem, from Tel Aviv, Israel doesn't have the, Iran is far away enemy. Well, Iran is not far away enemy. Iran is all over the borders of Israel. It's in Lebanon with the Hezbollah. It's in Gaza Strip with the Hamas. It is in the West Bank with the Islamic Jihad, and probably also within the Arabs, some elements of the Arab citizens of Israel. Now imagine that Iran goes nuclear. The following day, Egypt, Turkey, Syria, Saudi Arabia would also like to have nuclear weapons. And then what? This region, which is a madhouse without nuclear weapon, how it would look with each of these countries going nuclear. This regime also returned to Islamization of the Arab-Israeli conflict. And it's not a problem facing Israel. And also facing the regimes in the more moderate Arab states like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or Jordan. So finally, what can be done? And I'll be trying to be very brief. Let's say, for one thing, and I said it so many times, I don't think that the Iranian nuclear program should have a solution with a trademark made in Israel. That's not exclusively the problem of Israel, and I don't think that Israel is the big power who can tackle this Iranian nuclear program. The problem is the problem of the world, and the solution would be provided by the world. It's too big a task for Israelis, but I will here mention as one sentence that was mentioned by a good friend of mine, former Chief of Staff of Israel, Dan Khalutz. He said the problem of Iranian nuclear program is the problem of the world until we in Israel realize that the world is not doing what it's supposed to do. I urge Israeli politicians to be more quiet on the issue of Iran nuclear program. Otherwise, it will give the impression as though Israel is willing, is capable to deal with it. But on the other hand, if Israel is quiet, the world will tend to forget. And here's the dilemma of Israel. If we don't speak up, the world would love to be quiet. In the meantime, I must tell you one thing. The Iranian nuclear scientists go to work every day. Even the days that the students were rioting in Tehran, they continue to go to work every day. And the clock of the Iranian nuclear program is ticking. So what is the solution? One is American-led solution. An American-led solution can be by dialogue and pressure. I am not against dialogue as one of the few Israelis who advocated American-Iranian dialogue years back, to the point that my views were very much unacceptable by the government of Israel. It was a taboo to speak about dialogue in Israel. But the dialogue that I had in mind was a real dialogue, not what's going on today. I must admit, we are even looking in the dictionary, what is the meaning of the word dialogue? Dialogue, unlike monologue, is two people speaking. I know it's two and more. I was thinking dialogue as two people speaking. Americans sitting with the Iranians to solve the problem. That was my concept of dialogue. Otherwise, what is the difference with President Obama and President Bush? This 5+1 did exist under President Bush. Dialogue, in my view, was that American and Iranians sit together and discuss. And this was, in my view, important for America, to have the Iranians sit with them. Iranians understood what is the challenge of this dialogue. They said that there is a policy of carrot and stick, and the carrot is poisoned. Yes, this carrot was poisoned for them. To sit with the Americans around the table with the flag of the United States and Iran, and my advice to the Americans would have been bombard Iran with chocolate, with candies, with good gestures. Give them a few months, 6 months, a year, to come out with some accepted formula. If they will accept, wonderful. If they won't, as I believe they won't. Because the Iranians, it's very difficult for them, I don't want to say beyond it, to say yes or no. In Iranian diplomatic vocabulary, the word yes and no are totally unused. Their answers are often range from no, however, to yes, but. And I know, and I knew in advance, that after months of negotiation, the Iranians will say yes, but. They don't say no, however. And then you go back to the first phase. And that's exactly what the Iranians are doing. and they are gaining more and more time. After the 1967 war, Hassanin Haikal, a close associate of President Nasser of Egypt, said that while the Arabs were playing backgammon, the Israelis were playing chess. And I think today the world is playing backgammon while the Iranians are playing chess. It should have been the other way around. Our policy towards Iran is not sophisticated enough. We trust God, we throw the dice and pray for good luck. And the Iranians are more sophisticated. And I think we should learn from them to be more sophisticated, cunning, and shrewd in conducting policy. There is nothing wrong with dialogue. If there is a deadline, and we know when it ends, and provided that we know that at the end of dialogue, we have a yes or no answer from the Iranians. So far, this has not been the case. So there is also an alternative, an option for pressure. Iran is vulnerable to pressure. Iran cares what the world thinks about it. And here I can advise what the Shirin Ebadi, the woman who won the Nobel Prize for Peace, called the European countries from Tehran. Downgrade your diplomatic relationship with Iran from ambassadorship to cherchez d'affaires. And this is an Iranian woman speaking from Iran. She knows what hurts that guy, her government. I have not heard about any European country or other who has done so. You can pressure Iran on moral issues, on human rights issues. The most important point, I think, that should be raised in front of the Iranians is human rights. Where is the world? Why is the world so silent on violations of human rights when it comes to Iran? I know that Israel is being criticized often. We deserve part at least of the criticism. Go ahead and do it. Pressure Israel. But don't forget that violations of human rights are being done in so many other places. So why exclusively only one country should be blamed for this kind of issues? And I said, be my guest, criticize Israel. You are maybe right, but not only Israel, because I don't think it would be right to think that all the countries of the world are white and there is one thing which is black. And in the case of Iran, the issue of human rights is screaming to the skies. But each country is after its own selfish interest. There is economic pressure that can be used against Iran. There are many things that you can do to punish the government without punishing the people. Let the smart people of the world think that, God forbid, you don't want to punish the people. The second level of solution is Middle Eastern-made solution. I say there is no Israeli solution, but there is a Middle Eastern-made solution. And I'll be very blunt on this issue. Israel and the most moderate Muslim Arab countries should take each other's hand and solve the problems of Israel and the Palestinians, Israel and Syria. If there will be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, I don't see how Iran can say to death to Israel and killing Israelis or wiping out Israel from the map if Israel and the Palestinians would live in peace. I know that Americans say that it takes two for tango. In this issue, there is not even one. So unfortunately, right now, it's not in the cards. But I think that ultimately, if you want to weaken Iran and also do a good service to Israelis and Arabs, let's together solve the Palestinian problem, solve together the Arab-Israeli conflict. And third, and with this I will end, the third set of solution is the homemade solution. The Iranian people who brought this regime to power would bring a change and change the government or change the policy. Unfortunately, I can see the two trains which have left the terminal in Iran, two trains in Iranian society. One is the nuclearization of Iran, and the other is the train with social change message. Unfortunately, the train with nuclear weapon is driving much faster than the train with social change. Social change is usually slow and always unpredictable. We don't know how the Russian Revolution came, or the French Revolution, or even the Iranian Revolution, or even the fall of the Soviet Union, which was not a mass movement. Mass movement, those of you who are students of history know that they are totally unpredictable. One day, yes, they will march and start moving. But what makes people to change, I know that ultimately when this happens, we'll have many experts in the world who will say, yes, I knew exactly what will happen. Don't believe them, no one really knows. But what we know right now is that as much as we can tell, the process of nuclearization goes on, there are significant change in society, but the trend with nuclear is driving, in my view, much faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. So we have about 25 minutes for Q&A. And I'm going to start off with I was just on the internet now, we were speaking as I usually am. And within the last less than an hour, the IAEA came out with a report on the recent inquiries and trips to Iran to comment to look at their nuclear facility. And in the report they said just now that there's many unanswered questions and that they want more answers, and that they've said now for the first time, the IAEA, for the first time, has said that there's other secret sites in Iran that they want to know about. So in light of the update, I know Renee is here, I know she must have some questions as well from the Iran Documentation Center. Can you comment on the Obama strategy of, you spoke about the carrots and sticks, and 5+1. It seems to me that the Obama administration is entering into dialogue, but they've sort of separated the nuclear issue from the human rights issue. And I think that speaks in terms of the policy funding of groups within and without, outside of Iran and within the United States. And to me, the implications are disturbing. That by separating these two issues, even if the nuclear issue was somehow settled, which it doesn't seem that it's going to be, if it is settled and the human rights issue is sort of taken away from this, it would empower the regime to continue to abuse their own citizens. So how do you, in light of the human rights issue, how do you see the negotiations over nuclear questions by the Obama administration? Are they taking an appropriate tact? Are they dealing with the issues that need to be addressed?
So if we wait until human rights issues will be resolved to start negotiations, it's like Israelis who wait until Muslim and Arab countries are democratic before we start negotiations. We will not start negotiations ever. So I don't think we can have to wait until Iranian human rights record will be 100% white before we start negotiations. Negotiation means one of the aims is to resolve such problems as well. And to be honest with you, when I thought about dialogue with Iran before the recent developments, it never occurred to me the dialogue that is meant by America is the 5+1. I always thought in terms of bilateral dialogue. And there was a lot to Iran to gain and a lot for America to gain. And I think that one of the disturbing things between Iran and the United States is that the relations are controlled or guided by so much by emotion rather than rationality. The two countries have so much in common. And Iran should be very thankful to America, the country that has done the greatest services to Iran's national interest in the last 20 years is the United States of America. America removed the enemy #1 of Iran, Saddam Hussein, from their western borders. America removed the enemy #2 of Iran, the Taliban in Afghanistan. But they have their own peculiar way to thank America for such great services. It means also that there is some common ground and common interest between the two countries. America has never taken any inch of Iranian territory. It's never threatened the sovereignty of Iran. Other countries around it did. So there are, I think, there is basis for better relationship between the two. The problem is for the Islamic revolution in Iran, which has withdrawn so many principles on their ideological agenda. To accept the America is almost an admission of a total failure of the Islamic revolution. And that's why I was so eager to see dialogue. To have the Iranians sit with the Americans will change the nature of this regime. They cannot be the same regime as before if they sit with the Americans. About the Obama administration, the only thing I can say as someone who wants to come back again and again to America is, no, I know it's just kidding. In your country, it's a free country. As I said before, I am totally in favor of dialogue with Iran. I am totally in favor of any concession that the administration would like to do to the Iranians, provided that they will stop their nuclear program and respect human rights. That's the only bottom line that I have. As it seems today, is that America is so eager to have some kind of engagement with Iran that he forgets from time to time to ask for some preconditions. For example, I would have insisted, after the June problems in Tehran, the dialogue would be bilateral. Unfortunately, I don't know why America did not ask for bilateral dialogue.
And I just make a comment and related to the question. Just a comment would be in terms of human rights. It's amazing that the regime just appointed a new defense minister who has an Interpol warrant for bombing the Jewish community center in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And now it seems that Yemen is very open. The regime is supporting civil war in Yemen very openly and actually warning the West not to intervene. So they're very emboldened. It's pretty amazing. And Obama is not responding, which I find interesting.
I wanted to pick up just a little bit. Right? Okay. Why you mentioned that that the world is not holding the Iranian regime accountable for human rights, and you mentioned that it's in self-interest. Can you expand on that a little bit? Why is it that the world doesn't hold Iran accountable?
You know the answers better than I do. But I can.
Well, no.
I think that the world is composed with particular nation states, with each of them its own national interest. I don't think the question is being asked what we can do together, but what is the impact of such an act on each of us in particular. For example, Germany, Italy, France. I can accept statements that are made by Angela Merkel are very good. But then you look at the volume of trade between the two countries, they go to the sky. So if I'm Iranian, I say, okay, they speak up, but they certainly don't punish us. I'll give you an example of a more effective European policy. It goes back to the question, issue that Charles raised about the defense minister of Iran, his views and past record. In April 1997, a court in Berlin found Iranian leaders guilty in involvement in acts of terrorism in Germany. The case of Mykonos trial, a Kurdish leader was killed in a restaurant in Berlin. All EU countries returned their ambassadors from Tehran. This was a big punishment for the Iranians. I don't think it's coincidental that a month later, the Iranians voted for Khatami, a moderate, pragmatic candidate, to be the president of Iran. And this relates to what Shirin Ebadi called. If there will be a concentrated world attitude toward it, Iran is not as strong as we tend to believe. They are much more vulnerable. They are much more careful of their respect in the world and how the world views them, even how the Americans view them. But what can we do when you have, well, ended a long session today without mentioning names of two countries, China, Russia. How you can convince them? Russia is happy that Iran goes nuclear? I don't think so. But maybe the Chinese don't care so much, but the Russians know exactly who is Iran. Both of them, by the way, have problems with small Islamic minorities. The Chinese in July had confronted with student movements or young movement in China's Muslims, and the Russians sent in Chechnya for a long time. Interestingly, Iran doesn't criticize China or Russia. No, they can speak about Palestinians all the day, about suppression of Palestinians, but when other Muslims are suppressed by good friends, it's quiet. Look at the Iranian newspaper, see if you find anything on these issues. So it's not only Iran, but also the European, also other countries. At the end of the day, they want to have their own their own interest. And I remember when American President Ronald Reagan announced economic embargo against Iran in the early 80s, during this hostage crisis, or after. I think it was the Canadian government who announced that whatever America will not sell you, we can sell. So if you have friends like the Europeans and others, you cannot go that far. I think that today the world is not sufficiently supportive of the United States, and policy towards Iran cannot be left to the Americans alone. This should be a worldwide effort, and what you ask them actually is not much. Is suspend the nuclear program. Respect more human rights.
Thank you for your presentation. In your presentation, you identified 3 possible solutions for preventing Iran from going nuclear. One is sort of a global solution led by the United States. One is sort of a Middle Eastern regional solution, which sort of establishes peace between Israel and Palestine. And another is sort of an intra-state solution, which is sort of a grassroots level sort of revolution within Iran. But one of the things that you strongly sort of discouraged against or sort of cautioned against is sort of a unilateral Israeli move to prevent Iran from going nuclear.